Hey, what's up, everybody? It is Uncle Matt here today with a special live stream discussing the breaking news that we got late last night from WWE. I guess it's not officially news. We're getting Google Fiber installed in our neighborhood, so if you hear some construction noise, apologies, but live breaking news cannot be delayed for construction purposes, so we will press on. So the news that was seemingly being rumored to about to break last night on Twitter was that WWE was potentially being sold to the Saudi Arabia Public Investment Fund, which is essentially where the Saudi Arabia government stores their billions upon billions upon billions of dollars and use that and what they use to make purchases such as Newcastle Football Club, the Live Golf Tour. It's basically it's a weird kind of fund that the government set up to put all the billions of dollars the government has into a place that's not necessarily in the government. I don't fully understand it. It's a workaround. Basically, the Saudi Arabian government was potentially going to buy WWE. It was never officially confirmed. A few outlets, a few sources were putting it out there that it was official. But the kind of main wrestling journalists that you should trust and follow, such as Dave Meltzer and Sean Sapp, never went as far as to confirm it. They just simply said that it was likely that there were rumors going around. They confirmed that it was a possibility. It's something that had been discussed in the weeks building up to the news breaking last night, but never officially confirmed. And then earlier this morning, it started to come out that the reports, the rumors weren't true. Ariel Helwani had a very interesting tweet about this, and I think his tweet was maybe the most interesting one because he covered WWE for BT Sports. He's got a lot of connections in WWE. He's had tons of WWE talent appear on his interview show. Nick Khan, the CEO of WWE, is Ariel Helwani's former talent agent before Nick Khan left the agency business to become an executive with WWE, so there's a connection there. So Ariel Helwani would have the information, at least the information that WWE wants to have put out. That's not necessarily the truth. That's not necessarily the correct information, but it's the information that WWE would want out regarding the story. What was most interesting to me about Ariel Helwani's tweet was he said that WWE has not been sold to Saudi Arabia at this precise moment. And I think the wording of that is what is interesting there, precise moment. So essentially saying it hasn't happened yet, but not saying that it's not going to happen. So I'll talk a little bit more about the whole deal, about what I think is going on, what I think is going to happen. We got to backtrack. We got to start at the very beginning of this whole story to fully understand what's going on and why I think what's going to happen next is going to happen. I'm not an insider. I don't have any inside sources. I follow along on, a lot of the wrestling sites and the news information sites. And then I kind of try to read between the lines and piece things together and just kind of, from my years of following WWE, what I kind of understand of it and what I can kind of piece together. So I've got some ideas about where I think things are going, what I think might be happening that I'll share in a minute. But we got to go back to the start of the story just for anybody that's tuning into this that doesn't know how we got to this point. Rewind back to last summer of 2022, around July or August. Now, I don't have any of this written down. I'm just kind of flying off the cuff here. I don't have a script, so if I have some dates or events kind of in the wrong order, apologies, but I'm just kind of trying to give the general idea of what has led us to this point. So like I said, last summer, July, August of 2022, somewhere in that range, reports emerged that the board of directors for WWE was investigating WWE owner and chairman Vince McMahon for having had an improper relationship with a staff member. Now, where this really got him into trouble more than any of that stuff, because Vince McMahon's had these type of accusations for years of, improper relationships, where this one in particular got him into trouble and why the board of directors was investigating it was because there were irregularities with this staff member's salary. She got an unusual bump in pay, and they believed it may have been connected to her relationship with Vince McMahon. And after their relationship ended and she left the company, she was given a payoff, severance, hush money, whatever you want to call it, and also signed an NDA. And it was unclear on if the money that she was paid in her departure from WWE, her settlement, if you will, there was uncertainty on if that came directly from Vince McMahon's personal money, or if it was money that was used that was allotted to be company money, which would obviously be violations of financial regulations and things that the company has to answer for as a publicly traded company. So the board was investigating all of this. The SEC started looking into it because of the potential financial irregularities that would come from these type of situations. And ultimately, all of this led to Vince McMahon, quote unquote, retiring from WWE, stepping down from his position as lead of creative, stepping down as a member, as a chairman of the board. Basically, he retained his ownership stake and his full voting rights, but in terms of day-to-day operations of the company, he retired and stepped away at that time. Now, once again, this had nothing to do with the kind of Me Too cancel Vince McMahon because of these sexual indiscretion type of situations. This was 100% because the company was at risk because of the financial implications of what he had done as a publicly traded company. So he's got away with being accused of sexual misconduct for years, but it was the financial aspect of this allegation that ultimately is what forced his hand, what forced the board and other people near him to recommend to him that he retire and step away to protect the company. So following that, Nick Khan and Stephanie McMahon, who had just prior to this all going down, had left the company for a leave of absence. Some speculation she had been forced out over potentially butting heads with Vince over some of these issues that had come to light. But she returned to work with Nick Khan as the co-CEOs of WWE. Triple H, who had essentially been working in a reduced capacity following a heart issue and following some of his responsibilities being taken away by Vince McMahon, returned as the lead of creative for WWE, so the guy who was coming up with all the ideas for Raw, SmackDown, the pay-per-views, the shows. He took over that aspect of WWE and has run it that way ever since. And so that's where we've been at pretty much ever since then. Triple H has been running the TV shows. Stephanie and Nick Khan have been running the company. Lots of speculation throughout this time that there could be a sale. Really, the speculation on WWE potentially being for sale has been going back since 2016. There's even been reports that they've been willing to sell since that time, but they just haven't got the right offer. Reportedly, after the big sale that UFC got to Endeavor is when Vince McMahon got very serious about listening to offers, but he wanted something similar, if not more, than what UFC got when they were sold to Endeavor. And to that point, no offers of that nature had come through. So he retained ownership, kept going, doing what he was doing. So, but with him stepping down, him stepping out of power, it certainly seemed like the sale was more of a possibility than at any point in the history of the company, because Vince was kind of always going to be there. It was hard to ever see him giving it up because it's so much ingrained in who he is. But with him having stepped away, it seemed possible, like maybe now's the time. Maybe we're finally going to see WWE sold. There was a lot of rumors about who would be interested in buying them. NBC Universal Comcast seemed like a likely fit because they regularly pay WWE millions and bordering on billions of dollars to have the rights to air their content on their networks, such as Peacock, such as USA Network, occasionally specials on NBC even. So it made sense for them. Almost, let's cut out the middleman. Let's just buy the company and then we own the IP outright and don't have to pay these new television rights fees every 3 to 4 years when we have to renew. We also don't have to go into bidding wars with other people. They lost SmackDown to Fox in the most recent round of bidding wars. So they always seem to make sense as a company that would want to buy WWE. Other networks also made sense. Netflix, Amazon, any company that's just the streaming companies in particular. They're just looking for content. It always made sense that somebody like that would buy WWE, get the IP, cut out the middleman of having to negotiate TV deals with them, and just own it outright and be able to put it wherever they wanted on any network they had. But nothing really came of it in the immediate turnover of the Vince McMahon stepping down, retiring. Things kind of went as they have gone. WWE's product has been a lot better in the time period. It's been a lot more entertaining. It's still not always the best. Some of the shows are a little on the boring side, but a lot of the stupid, repetitive stuff that you'd see on Raw or SmackDown has been phased out, and you're at least getting new stuff every week. You're at least getting entertaining matches every week. A lot of the dumb verbiage, a lot of the weird, heavily scripted promos have mostly gone away. There's still a little bit of that, but overall the product is by and far better than it was at any point in the last like 5 to 6 years with Vince McMahon in charge. So everything's been going smoothly. We're rolling into WrestleMania season. Royal Rumble's right around the corner. They've announced this WrestleMania is one of the biggest gates in WrestleMania in WWE history. That it is the biggest gate in WWE history. Lots of rumors that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson could be coming back for a match against his cousin Roman Reigns, who's been the lead face of WWE, the main attraction for the last 2-3 years. Everything seems to be coming up WWE. Everything seems to be going really well. Yeah, Richard, as I said, nothing official. They haven't been sold yet. Rumors came out last night, but once again, it's been denied up to this point. But so, keep it on the timeline here. There started to be rumblings that Vince McMahon felt like he got bad advice when he was told to retire, that when he was told to step down, and he was starting to sort of maneuver, work his way into potentially coming back, that he wanted to come back, he wanted to find a way back in. He felt like he'd gotten bad advice. He feels like whatever the issues were at the time have finally blown over. It's time for Vince McMahon to make his grand return. Somewhere along the way there, he appealed to the board of directors to reinstate him either to the board. I'm not exactly sure what he was trying to get at that point in time, but in his initial attempt to return to WWE, the board of directors voted no. They did not vote to return him. So it seemed like, maybe that was the end of it. Maybe that was dying down. But the key here is through his retirement, through his stepping down as one of the lead executives of WWE, he still retained the highest level of voting rights as the highest stockholder within the company. So he essentially gave up all his direct day-to-day control, but never really gave up control of WWE. Up until this point, he was mostly still trying to do things the right way, letting the board vote him back in. I don't know if he thought they would. I don't know why he would let it get to that point unless he thought they would. He might have been caught off guard by the fact that they voted not to let him come back in. But ultimately, that vote really didn't matter because he has the voting control, the voting power. So what he has done in the last week or so is he used his voting power to vote himself back onto the board of directors, removed 2 people that I can only assume he didn't trust, that he didn't want on the board, replaced them with 2 people that were formerly his right hands as presidents of the company. So essentially, he's bringing in people that are on his side back to the board of directors. I believe 3 other members of the board of directors then subsequently resigned after Vince McMahon's return. The new redesigned board has then since voted to re-elect him as the executive chairman. The WWE, Vince, everybody close to them has kept putting out he's not coming back to have anything to do with day-to-day operations. The executives will remain in power as they have been with Nick Khan, Stephanie McMahon, and Triple H. He has only been brought back. He's only returning to facilitate the sale of WWE should one arise, and also negotiate the future television rights deals for the company, because I think in his mind they could never sell the company without him authorizing the sale. So he was going to come back and get his hands into it one way or the other. And I think he feels like when it comes to TV rights negotiations, he's always been right there, been a part of it. There's a part at first I thought this might be just like him coming back, like the last chance to kind of save his legacy was if he was directly involved in the sale of the company. He could claim, I made this huge sale of the company and cashed it in. But what's gone down in the last 2 to 3 days makes it seem like that's not the case. As Richard just mentioned in the comments, no way he stays out of creative. And I think that's where the Saudi story gets interesting. So, as I mentioned earlier, one of the suitors that always made the most sense as a potential buyer for WWE was Comcast NBC Universal, because they've been a long-time television partner, a long-time broadcasting partner of WWE, dating all the way back to the 80s with Saturday Night's Main Event. So it's a long-standing relationship, it's a long-standing partnership. It would make a lot of sense for Universal to outright buy WWE, because then they would fully control the intellectual property. They wouldn't have to negotiate for TV rights. They would just own it and be able to put it anywhere they wanted. If they wanted to put more stuff on Peacock, they could do so. If they wanted to bring a show to NBC proper, they could do that. If they wanted to make USA just the WWE channel and have WWE on 7 nights a week, they could do that. It would cut out the middleman of them having to pay WWE for the rights to the television broadcast fees, which is, anywhere as it keeps going up and up and up. WWE is kind of clinging on to the sports fees, where they keep going up and WWE keeps going up, because even though they're not anywhere close to what they were in the 90s, they're still one of the most consistent ratings draws on television. So it always made sense for NBC Universal to be one of, if not the main suitor to purchase WWE. But the problem there, if you're thinking in Vince McMahon's brain, is NBC Universal buys the company, it remains a publicly traded company. That keeps Vince McMahon out. He cannot come. He basically cannot fully come back as long as it's a publicly traded company. He still has a lot of control with his voting shares, but in a lot of ways, if these allegations, they're still being investigated as we speak. Like nothing, it hasn't been finalized if there's going to be any punishments or any real fallout with the SEC or otherwise from the financial improprieties he's being accused of. So as long as that's hanging over it, and as long as it's a publicly traded company, it would be almost impossible for him to fully return in the way he probably wants to. Now, if the Saudi Arabian government were to buy WWE, they would take it private. It would no longer be a publicly traded company. It would go private, which would mean there's no longer the same financial issues. There's no longer the same need to answer to the shareholders to make sure the stock price is as good as it possibly can be, which is ultimately the main goal of any publicly traded company. All that goes out the window, and also they no longer would have to disclose their financials publicly because they're no longer publicly traded, meaning any weird financial things that Vince has that haven't been released yet, that haven't been uncovered yet, go back into a crater, get buried back underground, never heard from again, can be hidden away. Vince McMahon can step back into power. He can lead creative. He can fully take back over. He can get all these people that took over the company while he stepped down out and really take back control. So to me, given he's got this existing partnership with them from having agreed to getting paid millions upon millions of dollars to put on shows in Saudi Arabia over the last few years, there's an existing relationship there with Vince and the Saudi government. They probably have a better relationship with him and also probably don't care about some of the stuff he's in trouble for the way a big corporation like NBC Universal would. So if I'm Vince McMahon and I'm looking at potential sales partners, Saudi has the most money for sure, so I don't know what the offers would look like for Saudi compared to, say, NBC Universal. They could definitely offer the most money, but they also offer Vince McMahon the direct path back into power in WWE. And he's already kind of pushed his way back in, but there's certain things he still can't do. There's certain things he's got to kind of pump the brakes on. But if they can sell to Saudi Arabia and Saudi Arabia takes the company private, all that goes out the window and Vince McMahon can fully step back into power. Now, at that point in time, once the Saudis own it, they can decide what they want to do. And, you know, given their history with Vince McMahon, given their relationship with Vince McMahon, given that they're very unlikely to care about his indiscretions, they're very likely willing to put him back as the seat of power, as the main man, as the guy leading the company overall day-to-day operations, everything across the board. So, Richard, question here. How long does Triple H stay around since his wife resigned? So, the Stephanie one is sort of interesting. The timing of it is what made it the most interesting because WWE had put out several press releases saying there was going to be no change to management. Vince McMahon was not going to be involved in day-to-day operations. The executives were going to continue on in their role. Now, if you remember, before she stepped in as co-CEO, as I mentioned earlier, she had briefly taken a leave of absence from the company. Some sources even said it really wasn't a leave of absence. She just didn't want to outright say she was leaving the company, but she was leaving the company. But she was kind of forced to come back in when all this Vince stuff went down. So the question is, why is she now stepping down right after we were told there would be no changes to the management? Is it, in her statement, she said it's basically she's going back on what she had planned to do originally, now that things have kind of reset and restructured and stabilized. Stabilized, not really. She basically said she's going back to what she had planned to do originally and it's taking a leave of absence. So from that regard, I don't see it affecting Triple H. It's going to be, Triple H's status is going to come down to if Vince McMahon is able to fully get back into power. If he's able to fully get back into power, he may see Triple H as somebody that stabbed him in the back. I don't really know how he views people like Triple H, how he views Nick Khan, how he even views his own daughter, these people that filled the void when he had to step away. It's very likely, if you go back to the start of this whole story with the Wall Street Journal's initial reports, somebody within WWE had to have leaked to Wall Street Journal the information that the board of investigators was in, or the board of directors was investigating Vince McMahon. That wasn't something that Wall Street Journal just stumbled upon. Somebody within WWE who wanted to see Vince McMahon go down had to have leaked that information to the Wall Street Journal. And there's only a handful of people that truly have benefited in a big way from Vince's departure. So it's a short list of who that might be, but we don't know. But if I'm Vince McMahon, I probably just assume everybody that stuck around and took over my roles, took over my power is an enemy at this point in time. So if a sale to Saudis or some other entity that would put Vince McMahon back on top happens, I think that's where Triple H goes out, because whether he would step down himself at that point or whether Triple H or whether Vince McMahon would force him out, that's where he gets into trouble. If he, if the company sells to NBC Universal, if it sells to, Fox or Netflix or something like that, I think they more likely would want somebody like Triple H to stick around in charge. But all that's up in the air. We just really won't know until we know more about what's actually going to happen with the sale. Saudis are losing millions on Live Golf, and they don't seem to care. I looked this up today. The Saudi public investment firm which is what they use to set up Live Golf, what they use to buy Newcastle, what they would potentially use to buy WWE, is worth $670 billion. So they are more than willing to lose money on these projects, because ultimately the end goal for them is not to make money. And I'll get into that in just a second. But here, once again, I kind of summed it all up. The reason I think so here's the deal. I think somebody within the company who maybe didn't want this sale to go down to the Saudis leaked it out to the media that the sale was going down. They may have jumped the gun a little bit, because it was just a few days ago that WWE announced that they had, I don't exactly know how to word this. They were going to work with JP Morgan as the banker to help them facilitate the sale of the company. So usually if you follow along, like I've seen a lot of this recently because I've been following the potential sale of Manchester United, the potential sale of Liverpool, the sale of Chelsea last year after Roman Abramovich was forced to liquidate his shares of the club after his ties to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So there's been a lot of interesting stories like this that are similar, of like major sports teams, major sports properties having sales going down. So, I don't know everything about it, but typically the process is a lot longer than you bring in a bank to help with the sale. You don't sell like 2 to 3 days later. It takes time, because whoever they work out a deal with, whoever they sell to, there's going to have to be arrangements made with their partners. So if it's not NBC Universal or Fox or one of their TV broadcast partners, they still have contracts with them, I believe, through 2024, maybe just 2023. I'm not sure, but at least a year or two left on their current TV deals. So there has to be some kind of agreement in place there, or some kind of acceptance there. A lot of people I've seen speculating about, like, what does this do to their partnerships with toy companies? Mattel, does Mattel want to be in business with the Saudi Arabian government? The video game companies, 2K, do they want to be in business with the Saudi Arabian companies? As Richard actually brought up a good point talking about Live Golf. They started this Live Golf tour. They've paid millions upon millions of dollars to attract some of the top golfers in the world to leave the PGA Tour and join their tour. But they have not been able to secure a TV rights deal yet for Live Golf. And a lot of the speculation is that they're eventually just going to have to pay a network to broadcast it, that they're not going to get paid themselves, because that's not how typically sports work. Typically, the broadcasters pay the leagues for the right to broadcast the games, the events, the content from those leagues. That's where NFL gets all their money. That's where NBA gets all their money. That's where WWE gets all their money, is from the TV broadcasting deals. The one comparable thing we've seen is the start of Live, and they have not been able to get a TV deal. Now, starting Live from scratch and trying to get a TV deal for it is a very different prospect to buying the number one wrestling company in the world that's been that way since the 80s. The WWE is a lot higher level of brand. The Q rating's a lot higher. And ultimately, at the end of the day, money talks. So I don't know, everybody wants to be on the moral high ground and say, oh, we would never be associated with Saudi Arabia. We cannot be associated with these people in their, way of life. But a lot of times in these situations, money talks. So I don't know how true that would be, but that's going to be a step in the process if they are going to sell to Saudi Arabia. They're going to have to get all of their sponsors on board. They're going to have to get all their partners on board. This is not a sale of this nature to entity like Saudi Arabia is not something WWE can just snap their fingers and as soon as they get an offer they like from Saudi Arabia, just say, boom, we like that offer, we'll take that deal, sold. It's going to be something that's going to have to be negotiated out, discussed, get some things lined up with partners and with sponsors and things like that. They can't just do it on a whim. So what I believe happened is I believe there's an offer on the table. I believe WWE has, or Vince at least, is wanting to accept that offer, but it's too early in the stage for it to actually fully be said. The deal is done, it's sold. I think somebody from WWE, maybe even the same person that was leaking the Vince stuff out from the get-go, leaked that out to try to get this out early, to try to get the bad press cycle started before the sale gets too far along. Start getting it rejected now. Start making sponsors aware of what's going on now. Start making fans who might be against this move aware of it now. That's the only reason I could see that it got out in the way it did last night. Like every wrestling journalist that, on the internet had some version of something's happening, something's happening, something. And it's the old saying, where there's smoke, there's fire. So obviously the sale hasn't happened. It was never going to be done last night. That was kind of crazy to even think that because, like I said, it's too long of a process for them to have just enlisted the help of JP Morgan like a few days ago and already have a fully finalized sale today. So what I believe is happening, as I said, I think Vince McMahon wants the Saudi deal because that's the one that most likely leads to him being able to get full control and full power back. I believe that an offer has been extended to WWE from Saudi Arabia that Vince McMahon wants the company to accept. And I believe somebody within the company pushed that information out to the media in hopes of getting that information out earlier than it otherwise would have come out to curtail the deal, to get the bad press of the deal started early and hopefully kill the deal before it gets too far along. That's just my speculation. 100% speculation. No inside sources. That's just me from what's come out, what we do know, me kind of reading between the lines, me kind of piecing things together in my brain. That's my speculation, purely 100%. No real information there. I think there's a deal on the table. I think Vince McMahon wants to accept it. I think somebody leaked that information to try to help get the deal killed by getting the bad press cycle that will inevitably come from being involved with Saudi Arabia started early. Whew, that was a lot. That was a big information dump there. What's interesting in this situation is this is, Live Golf, as Richard brought out, sort of was Saudi Arabia's first real kind of dipping their toe into the water of the American sports game. They're all over Europe. They bought Newcastle United. They're rumored to potentially be trying to find a way to also buy Manchester United, although I don't know can own two Premier League clubs simultaneously, but I'm sure they can move money around and maybe have an individual emir or something like that be the technical owner of Manchester United if they can work that out. They've been kind of getting their fingers into different spots in European sports. Live Golf was their kind of first entry into American sports, and it hasn't, like Richard mentioned in the comments, they've spent millions on getting the best golfers in the world to join Live, but they haven't been able to get a TV deal yet, so it hasn't really clicked. It hasn't really blown up yet, and a lot of the golfers from Live Tour are trying to find a way to still be able to compete on the PGA Tour and do both. They want, cake and eat it too, so to speak. The WWE would be a hugely different leap into the American sports media industry for Saudi Arabia. It's could be just step one of the next phase of what they'd like to do in terms of, and now we can finally get into it, sports washing. If you're not familiar with sports washing, it's basically a term that means negative entities using sports to clean up their image. You probably heard this term a million times during the World Cup because Qatar spent the entire summer doing, or not, basically spent the last 10 years sports washing, building their own league, sponsoring tournaments and things from around the world, sending their national teams to different tournaments, basically trying to clean up the image of Qatar. And the World Cup was, they bought the World Cup to try to clean up the image of Qatar. Saudi Arabia is rumored to be heavily pushing and heavily setting up their bid to host the 2030 World Cup. Now, if you've got a nice little clean looking golf league, you've got a Premier League club in Newcastle that's one of the top teams there. You own the biggest wrestling company in the world. You know, all this. You certainly look a lot better in the light in some people's eyes than you do if you're just evil Saudi Arabia that murders and chops up journalists who report bad things about you. And that's what this would be. You know, like I said, they're not buying WWE to make money. They have $670 billion in the bank. WWE would never in a million years turn enough profit to even be like a drop in the bucket to Saudi Arabia. They would be buying WWE to infiltrate the American market, to basically be able to get Saudi Arabian propaganda onto American eyeballs. If you've ever watched one of WWE's shows that they air from Saudi Arabia, whether it be Crown Jewel, any of those, you know what I'm talking about. The commentators are very high to praise Saudi Arabia and what a great country it is. Jeddah is such a beautiful city. Everybody should love Saudi Arabia. And this would be that times a million. Every Monday Night Raw, every SmackDown, every live pay-per-view event. If you go to an arena house show, there's going to be a video going, visit Saudi Arabia on the video board. That is what this would be. This is not something for Saudi Arabia to make any profit, because any profit they would make off it would be a drop in the bucket to what they already have. This is to clean up the image of Saudi Arabia in the global marketplace. Yeah, Richard says WWE board has to find the best deal for all shareholders or they will be sued. That is true, but this is another reason why the Saudi, I believe, is a big potential problem, is that, once again, Saudi has more money than any other bidder possibly could have. And if they bid the most money, that is technically the best arrangement for the shareholders. So there's not much ground to stand on if Saudi Arabia bids. You know, if anything, if Saudi Arabia were to bid, say, $10 billion to buy the company, but the company accepted an $8 billion bid from Comcast Universal, then shareholders could sue WWE for taking the lower bid. So that's kind of the problem with, like, this is where the shareholders actually are starting to lose power in this situation, because unless they just decide that it was a waste of time and not worth it, Saudi Arabia by far can offer the highest bid of any potential bidder in this sale process. So they can negate the shareholders' ability to complain about the deal just by adding a $2 billion on there. And it's not, once again, it's nothing to them to add that extra money onto this deal. Yeah, that is, Richard mentioned, I'm sure AEW value has just jumped up greatly. He's right. If nothing else, it'll be interesting if the TV partners for WWE were to decide they don't want to be affiliated with the Saudi Arabia version of WWE. Say Comcast Universal, they get outbid in this deal by Saudi Arabia, and they say, hey, we're not a part of this anymore. This is no longer going to be on USA Network. We're no longer going to have their content on Peacock, or Fox decides not to bid again. That's suddenly two people in the marketplace that may be looking for replacement content, which, you know, right now, I don't know how many people would be in the bidding for AEW when their TV deal comes up. I think Warner Brothers would want to keep them on the TNT Turner networks, but you kind of need more bidders to drive the price up. So if Turner's the only one interested in AEW right now, that's not good for them in terms of what they could get on their next TV deal. But if suddenly USA Network's looking for new wrestling content, and if suddenly Fox is looking for new wrestling content, and WWE is suddenly this got this scarlet letter on them that maybe TV networks aren't as keen to sign up with WWE as they were before, that astronomically puts WWE through the roof. And it's interesting, you know, if for whatever reason, if the bad publicity, if the bad press for this deal somehow forces it not to happen and Saudis don't get WWE, do they then look at AEW? Do they then go to the next best option? Is that something they would be? Or is it just, you know, WWE is such a bigger global entity than what AEW is at this point, and it's, you know, it's not fair to compare because AEW is only 3 or 4 years old, but the implications for them coming out of this deal are definitely interesting. Does it up their value as a company? Does it up their value in the TV marketing place? There's just so many factors like that that are going to be very interesting to see how this all plays out. But sort of the weird, more interesting thing that really hasn't been talked about, Dave Meltzer on his kind of emergency podcast that he did last night breached this topic a little bit, but there's a lot of wrestlers in WWE that don't like the current deal they have with Saudi Arabia to go over there and do 2 or 3 shows a year. There's some that outright don't go. Sami Zayn, because of his Syrian descent, is not allowed to go to the Saudi Arabia shows. Saudi Arabia does not let Sami Zayn go there. I don't think he would go anyways, based on, his heritage and everything, but where does that leave him? He's been arguably the MVP of the second half of this last year for WWE. If they're suddenly owned by Saudi Arabia, a country that does not allow him to enter their borders, how can he continue on as a performer for that company? Kevin Owens has started to refuse to go to the Saudi Arabia shows in support of Sami Zayn. John Cena, he's not full-time anymore, but towards the end of his last kind of full-time era, he had stopped going to the Saudi Arabia shows because he knew being associated with Saudi Arabia could potentially mess with his attempts to break into Hollywood and expand his stardom there. That's 3 pretty significant stars right there that want nothing to do with Saudi Arabia. Then you look at somebody like how many of the wrestlers were on the tour. If you're not familiar with this, one of the trips to Saudi Arabia, they did show over there. This has been 2, 3, 4 years back now even. I believe the story goes, now once again, I don't have this written down, I'm just kind of shooting from the back of my head right here if I can remember all this correctly. They went to Saudi Arabia for one of their shows over there. Vince McMahon believed that Saudi Arabia was behind on the payments they owed him. So at the show, they cut the local feed to the Saudi Arabia TV networks from the show for a brief period of time as kind of like a, hey, you owe me money, we're cutting the feed type of deal. Like Vince McMahon forgetting that he's not the most powerful guy in the room when he's in Saudi Arabia. Which led to a little bit of a skerfuffle between him and the Saudi Arabian leadership, which when the wrestlers were leaving Saudi Arabia, their plane was essentially held hostage by Saudi Arabian military as kind of a wink to Vince McMahon, like, remember who's actually wearing the pants in this relationship, Vince. Several wrestlers from that one had sworn at the time that they would never go back to Saudi Arabia. Some of them have since gone back to Saudi Arabia because Saudi Arabia, once again, there's a lot of money in those deals. I believe Shawn Michaels at one point in time said the match he came out of retirement to do at one of the Saudi Arabian shows, he got paid $3 million for just one match. So that tells you, just that right there tells you what you're talking about. Why would these people do this? Why would these people get involved in this? Shawn Michaels got $3 million to do one match. And it was a tag team match, so he didn't really have to do that much. But yeah, money talks, so there's a lot of people that I think would take a firm stance within the company against being owned by Saudi Arabia, but if Saudi Arabia ups everybody's paychecks by a few zeros, that can change a lot. But it's going to be interesting, especially, and with Vince coming back, if he comes back to power, how many people that have come into positions within the company came back with the understanding that he was gone? Somebody like William Regal, who after only a few months in AEW returned to WWE because Vince was gone, because he wanted to come back and work with Triple H. What does that do to him? All these people who in the last few months have been wanting to go back to WWE because Vince was gone. What's happening now? You look at somebody like Jonah, who just re-debuted. Vince McMahon fired him. Cody, he was back when Vince was there. But, what is he thinking now that he returned to work for WWE and this could be a very different WWE within the next few months? It's all going to be very interesting. It's all just speculation at this point in time. I've told you what I think is the deal in terms of the sale. I think where there's smoke, there's fire. I think there is something to the rumors that were coming out last night. I think they were premature because the sale just can't happen that fast. It just can't possibly happen that fast. But for that many people to have had the information, to seem to think there was something to the information, leads me to believe that we have not heard the last of the Saudi Arabia to being the new owners of WWE story. And as I mentioned, one of the most interesting things to me was Ariel Helwani's tweet where he said, WWE has not been sold to Saudi Arabia at this precise moment. That is a very specific use of very specific terminology from somebody who would have what the company line would be, what the company would want out at that point in time. So that kind of wraps that up. One last thing. I see Richard said, return of Ring of Honor to TV. Tony Khan said that Ring of Honor's weekly television show will be a part of a relaunched Honor Club, which is kind of their online streaming service where they host all their content, stuff like that. He also said that there'd be more information about that following Wrestle Kingdom. So it seems like there may be some type of a partnership or a merger between the NJPW America and Ring of Honor to kind of bring some talent together, to bring some shows together. Because interestingly enough, that New Japan has announced that their American TV show New Japan Strong is done. It's taped its last episode. So we had this hint from Tony Khan that there might be some working relationship with New Japan on the Ring of Honor TV show. New Japan's American TV show just came to an end, so I would expect some kind of update on what's going to happen with Ring of Honor's TV and how it ties into New Japan sometime within the next few weeks. But yeah, sorry to have interrupted the Disney trip vlogs. I'm sure everybody has just been loving those. I know how popular those are and how great everybody loves me just being at Disney World and running around like an idiot. But this just felt like such a big story and such a thing. Like I said, I don't know anything. I'm not an insider. I don't have any kind of sources or anything like that. These are fun opportunities for me to do live streams and just kind of shoot from the hip and get stuff off my chest and share my thoughts on what's going on. And this was just too big of a story to just not jump on and do a live stream and talk about it. I'm planning to do another live stream soon. I don't know what exactly the date is. It'll be a kind of a post-mortem for the Tennessee Titans season. I didn't want to do it right after the season ended just because I had some speculation that there was going to be a lot of changes coming to the organization fresh off the end of the season. We've already seen that with Todd Downing and several other coaches getting fired. So I wanted to kind of give things time to settle in and kind of see a better idea of what was going to happen this offseason before I fully dive in and fully give my kind of 2022 Titans season post-mortem. So keep an eye out for that. That'll probably be coming up sometime, probably next week, because I've got several more videos coming from the trip vlog series. So I'll probably run through those and maybe jump on and do a Titans season recap live stream sometime next week. But either way, you'll always know what kind of content I have coming if you subscribe to the channel and turn the bell on for notifications. Thanks for watching. Richard, thanks for being so up with the comments in the chat. That helps me get through these when I've got something to bounce off of. So thanks for watching. We'll see you soon, and we will continue to follow this developing story with